Now, past President Steve Chevalier, Treasurer and Board Member of the Zilber Family Foundation, will introduce our speaker. Steve.
Thank you, President Karen. I'm honored today to introduce fellow Rotarian Reginald Reed Jr. Reggie is co-founder, or founder, I should say, and CEO of Mindful Staffing Solutions. Mindful Staffing Solutions addresses poverty, housing, workforce and economic isolation, and underserved communities in Milwaukee, as Paula mentioned. Reggie will go into depth on how we currently fund these issues, why we're funding them the wrong way, and how we can do better. But first, here's a couple things about Reggie. Reggie's a 30-year-old Mississippi native who moved to Milwaukee at the ripe old age of 3 years old, he says. He was an MPS student. He spent his youth studying philosophy, math, and art. So I think you were a nerd. I think that's what they call it. He has 2 children, a 5-year-old son named Rain and a 10-year-old daughter, Victoria. His current passions are fishing, hunting, shooting, and problem solving. When at home, he spends his time studying and reading about a wide variety of topics, and most of his energy is spent on trying to solve social problems in Milwaukee, for which we're all grateful. Reggie started out in the construction industry at age 19 and started his first company at age 22 in Germantown, Wisconsin. His specialty was residential remodeling and commercial roofing, and his last place of employment before starting Mindful Solutions was Roofed Right America. In 2016, he formed Mindful Solutions, and since has been recognized in many various ways for his work in developing workforces in Wisconsin. He became a Rotary member last year in September in hopes of solving larger problems and hopefully someday addressing rural problems. I've had the honor and the opportunity to attend a meeting at Reggie's headquarters out on the northwest side this year, and I was impressed with all the work they're doing and all the many goals and activities that are going on there as we were there. I'm pleased to introduce fellow Rotarian Reggie Reed.
This is awkward. I haven't presented in quite some time, let me tell you. So much so that I forgot. They say it's like riding a bike. Let's see if that is true. So, a couple disclaimers. I give disclaimers before I present every time. One, I tend to talk fast, so I might botch some words as I attempt to slow down. Two, I am extremely transparent to a fault. I am transparent, I am raw, and I will share my unbiased findings. So if any information I share offends anyone, please understand it is not my intention. But if we are going to address real problems with real solutions, the first thing we must be able to do is face the truth. And sometimes that is a little counterintuitive to where we find our personal positions. So I apologize in advance on that. Before I get into this, I'll give a little background about me. It's an interesting path how I even ended up here, right? So 19 years old, I was a high school dropout. I was living in my van and petty hustling in 53206. One day I met a guy who was willing to teach me construction. He was a drug addict. I made a deal with him. I would get him off of drugs if he would teach me to build a house. He agreed. I showed up to work the next day. I have not missed a single day of work since. That was 20 years ago. I've never left early, never came late, never called in sick. I've never tapped out of a single task in my entire career. As I've progressed in my career, I found myself more and more addicted to more complex problems. This is because at heart, when I was a kid, I remember my teacher saying, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, well, I want to be the smartest person in the world. She said, well, that's not possible. I said, well, I want to be an actor because they get to do everything in the world, right? And then I can take on every role in the world and then become the smartest person in the world, right? So I've always been obsessed with problem solving, which is why at the age of 12, I had already studied and read over the Bible about 14 times and moved on into philosophy, mathematics, Maxwell equations, Newton, Da Vinci, and the like. This career in construction took me in a different path, though, that I didn't see coming. And so in my last job, I found myself selling commercial roofing systems, and it was extremely fruitful and extremely easy because the entire thing was based on my ability to do math, right? And so I would win these jobs, and one day I was with my boss, and he says to me, "You're quiet. That's not like you." I say, "Well, I just been thinking. I think I need to quit my job." And he says, "What?" I said, "Dude, you got the entire company from the year before outsold right now. Why would you quit your job?" I said, "Well, listen, it's an uncomfortable feeling when you go back to your neighborhood because that's all you ever had and you're the only person successful, right? And all people want to talk about is how you're doing well. And in your mind and in your heart, you wish that you were all doing well. And so I didn't have that privilege. And so I told him that I think I needed to quit. He argued that where I was in life was because of my work ethic and my drive. And that's partially correct. However, there are a lot of people in poverty who were born there. And I can tell you because I was there are no signs that says this way out, right? You figure it out or you die there. That is literal reality that we live in. And so I told him, I said, when you guys hired me, you found an apple in a field. He says, what are you talking about now? I says, imagine you are in a field, you get to the bottom of a hill, and you find an apple, right? You can do one of two things. You can get excited that you finally maybe found something to eat, or you can come to the realization that there's probably an apple tree somewhere. So when you guys found me, you found an apple in a field. And what I'm telling you is that if you go where I'm from, there's an entire field of apple trees, but no one's shaking them. And so I feel the need to leave my job and use everything I've ever learned to figure out how I go and shake every apple tree I have ever seen. And so I put in my 2 weeks notice right there. The next 10 months, I moved into my sister's house, my sister right there. I moved into my sister's basement. I became a minimalist. And after I did it right away, the next day I was like, oh my God, I just quit my job. I had no idea what I was going to do. So I moved into my sister's house. She was like, you know what? I know whatever you're going to do, you're going to figure it out. You're more than welcome. Come on. So me and my daughter, we moved into my sister's house, and I began to unravel what I now understand as Milwaukee's most complex problem. And so with further ado, I'm going to go into this. Again, I apologize if I get choppy. Haven't presented in a couple years, but let's see if it's like riding a bike. So I got a clicker. Thank you, Aaron. Okay, so that's me. Since I started Mindful Staffing, I started 4 other companies. Mindful Group is a 501c3 I started in 2019 because I was doing a lot of out-of-pocket providing for supportive services because it wasn't just a job and education that people actually needed. They needed help with childcare and baby mama drama and the probation officer. It was all these things, you know. Get kicked out the house at midnight because you're fighting with your girl, and all I have to say is just don't miss work tomorrow, right? Don't get knocked off your career path because of temporary situations that take place in your life. So that's why the Mindful Group was formed. Mindful Measures was formed because I had this unique way of making sure that if I trained these people and I provided jobs with these people, they didn't get discriminated against when they got to actual opportunities. So I started turning workforce into sports drafts. And I thought I was just doing something neat for myself until all of my staffing clients started saying, how do we do this for us? And I'm like, well, you don't. This is kind of my secret sauce, right? But then I figured, well, I could turn the secret sauce into a software firm and probably get rich. I don't know. So I started Mindful Measures. Mindful Performance Division exists because I'm a licensed contractor. As much as I love problem solving and as much as I love, you know, complex issues, the only thing I love equally, if not as more, is building something and looking back at what I built and saying, "Damn good." You know, that is the initial feeling that got me addicted to construction. The first house I built was in Lake Geneva. I'll never forget, we wrapped up our roof trusses on a Friday. We went back to Germantown on Monday. We came back to Lake Geneva. That house stood taller than every house on the block. And right there, I fell in love with building houses. So these four companies kind of work together to create this weird situation that I don't really know how to describe, but I'm going to try my best today. Now, at Mindful Staffing, I was awarded 40 under 40, Future 50, Wisconsin Job Honor, and recognized as a power broker. And I don't say those things to like gloat or anything, but this is the level at which I am invested into this issue. It gets my all. Uh, Again, my sister witnessed me leave the office at 11 o'clock last night, went home and worked for 2 more hours, and was right back at the office at 6 o'clock this morning. I am this work. I left my job to do this work. I am not a person who's going to his job to work. There is a difference. Now, other people may know me for Mindful Measures. The company was established in 2018 because a reporter mistakenly stated that I was going to start a software company, and so I had to follow through on that. Either way, whether you know me from either or whether you don't know me at all, I'm here to share my insight on my findings on the city of Milwaukee's workforce environment, urban poverty, and the economic isolation of underserved communities, which impacts every area of Milwaukee business and community safety. Now, understand that this could be my dissertation, right? This is my synopsis of what I have found over the last 6 years working with the city, the county, the state, multiple nonprofit organizations, multiple employers in multiple industries, other staffing agencies like Manpower, and having mentors like John Schultz, who brought me to Rotary, and just really giving raw feedback on this is what I think I see in front of me. By the end of this presentation, there is one critical question that I ask everyone in this room, and I ask you to ask yourself that question as I go through this presentation. And that question is Milwaukee broken? I believe there is a chance that it is, but I could be wrong because I'm just a guy. So I got to get other feedback too. Now, since 2016, I've worked on this problem unbiasedly, and it should be noted that this mission started with a mathematical equation called the Fibonacci sequence. This sequence consists of utilizing two numbers, 1 and 1, and adding them together to get 2. Next in the sequence, you would take 2, add it with the prior 1 to get 3. 3 to 2 to get 5, 5 to 3 to get 8, so on and so forth. This equation is one of few that requires only 2 digits to figure out the algorithm, right? It is also a selfless equation that reaches towards infinity, and it is responsible for the biological structure of the human body and every other natural growing thing on this planet. It is a portion of God. Before starting this journey, like I said, I was in commercial roofing. At night, most of my time was spent studying physics, human consciousness, and sacred geometry. So over the years, I studied all these crazy subjects, right? And then I found myself addicted to human consciousness. I found human consciousness to be the closest thing to God that I would probably ever experience in my life. And to understand that, I began to understand the importance of tying consciousness and being conscious about everything around me. And so, due to the evolution of my own consciousness, oh, wait, I'm sorry, lost myself here. Okay, so no, that's right. Now, in 2015, I started looking at how mathematical equations have parallels with human conditions and human environment, right? And how the universe and nature, and more specifically the laws of physics, were constructed of mathematical equations that can be directly applied to other areas of life and have the same exact effect that they have in the world of quantum physics. That's where I started looking at things like this and trying to understand how an algorithm like perpetual motion can be turned into an algorithm for a perpetual exit out of poverty. Now, understanding a problem, in my opinion, knowing about a problem and understanding a problem actually makes you responsible for doing something about that problem, right? And if you don't, that's fine. It's not a life requirement, but I skipped some slides here. 1 second. It's not a life requirement, but one of the things that I have always been in tune with was how do I become a better human being? How do I have this human experience in a way that reverbs for every person I encounter and enhances their own human experience. And maybe when I die, in some way, I have changed the world through other people. Maybe. We don't know yet. We'll see. um, Now, one thing about the human experience is that to be a good human, one thing I learned is that there must be a really unique approach towards selflessness and unity, right? They say, and I'm gonna just go on a off topic here. I feel some extra minutes in, don't worry. Um, they say that when you look at the evolution of consciousness, it can be viewed like a piano board, right? You have a series of notes that go up to 8 and then they repeat. These will be considered the different levels of consciousness, right? 8 is considered the unity level of consciousness, right? So now, before I started this work, when I was in my sister's basement, the biggest issue I had was this. All I wanted to do was to teach the evolution of consciousness. I wanted to teach people in the hood how to change the way they think, because consciousness actually creates reality, and we can prove that through the laws of physics. But I said, man, this must be why the wise old man in Tibet sit on the hill by himself, because don't nobody want to pay for this, right? So So either I'm gonna be broke and teach people, or find a way to impact people some other way. So I said, okay, I cannot change the way people think, because people in the hood have money problems. And how do you get a person with money problems to take their mind off the money problem? You have to fix that. So I figured I have to find a way to get them paid. How do I get everyone paid? I would have to hire them, I guess. I would need a staffing agency, I guess. Then I said, wait, but who's going to hire all these people with no training and education? I would have to train them. No, they can go to MATC. But MATC costs money, and they got money problems. So they can't go to MATC. I would have to actually train them for free. I would have to have a staffing agency that owns a school that's free. Then I can get their attention, and then I can teach them about consciousness. So this whole thing started because I was trying to figure out how to teach people in underserved communities how important it is to tune in with your own level of consciousness. And this is what came out of this. Now, rant over, I suppose. Now, while the details of my story are interesting, if we got into it, I won't go into it there. I'm giving this presentation because I believe it's important to reveal my findings of my mental adventure into what I now recognize as our most critical issue. It is very likely that my findings can be applied to other cities, but with no research done outside of Nashville, which was also a match, I won't stand on that statement at this time. So considering that there has been enough time and resources wasted on this issue, let's dive right into it. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the need for a sustainable model that addresses the issue versus what we currently have. I have found that Milwaukee lacks a model that addresses the problem in even the most remote sustainable way. Let's take a look at some of the major community serving organizations, for example. Now, there are prominent organizations known for their remarkable work in support of underserved communities. While this is undeniably beneficial to the people of the community in the short term, which is typically the type of result needed, hot dog in a microwave, in the long term, it's damaging to our efforts to get rid of urban poverty entirely. In 2020, and I'm not going to name any organizations here, but if you know the numbers, just keep it to yourself. In 2020, a very popular organization that works with underserved communities had a budget of $32,812,848, which is up 230% from $14.1 million in 2018. 99.372% of that budget was from grant funding, which is fine because that's how we do things. But this also means that if the funding stopped, their budget would be $121,756, and this model would have a 0.0037% chance of sustainability. Why do we dump our money into these things? For every dollar this organization generates, it gets $265.50 for free. This is highly unstable and inefficient as it relates to addressing the issue of urban poverty in perpetuity. This is also just one example of how we invest into this issue with a more prominent example today. And based on my calculations, at this rate, it would take 27,027 years to sustain this model. Unacceptable. If we look at, oh, I skipped through some stuff there. Oh, I get ahead of myself. I'm not used to, you get it. Bill Gates said this. I thought this was brilliant. Automation applied to inefficient operation will magnify inefficiency. That is so true, and it is. I've never seen anything truer. So, if we look at the rent assistance budget alone for this organization, it was 18.8 million to help pay past due rent and bills for people in underserved communities. Now, of course, a lot of that can be contributed to COVID-19. However, not all of it. So what we can't do is we can't pretend like one problem caused all problems. We have to accept the reality that a lot of these problems existed before the pandemic. And we did the same thing to address them then. The pandemic gave us an excuse and a justifiable excuse to spend more money in inefficient ways on the same problems that we saw no end to. And I can assure you with 100% certainty, when all of the ARPA funds are gone and the world is 100% back to normal, there will be at least 50% of the programs started with ARPA funds will be gone because they are unsustainable. Now hold that thought. Back to physics. As it relates to physics, there's a such thing as an escape velocity, which is the amount of force needed to escape the gravitational constant of Earth considering its mass and radius. This is another equation that can be applied to the human condition of poverty. People in poverty have an escape velocity of $12,500 of investment. But much like a spacecraft leaving Earth, it is not just about force. The spacecraft has to be built right. The engineering has to be spot on because the escape velocity of 6.96 miles per second is useless if the rocket will not fly. We would need to make continuous investments of $12,500 the way things are structured. Or we have to just accept the loss of $12,500 every time we invest into non-sustainable projects and people don't actually get out of poverty. We can pick our poison. Now, back to the 18.8 million. That was enough money to provide an escape velocity for approximately 1,505 people, most of them probably head of the household, meaning 1,505 families who would never need that service again. Instead, we made investment knowing that we were fixing a short-term problem and that people may very well need the help again, considering we didn't actually address why they were behind on rent in the first place, maybe in some cases. In these situations, we assume that we didn't fund the problem enough and we reopen a similar grant and we do it again. And we use the fact that the funds were depleted to justify our working on the problem when we haven't really even done anything. If I have a lawn full of weeds and I cut the grass, on the surface, it looks like I've addressed the problem. But we all know that unless I treat the lawn, the weeds will grow back. And that's the type of environment that we are creating. We are continuously cutting the lawn of addressing poverty. I looked at some larger organizations' annual reports over the last 5 years because I'm a nerd, and I do things like pull organizations' annual reports and read them. I actually learned that, side note, I actually learned that from Bill Gates. So Bill and Melinda Gates, the way they went about funding aids to other countries over the years were based on him reading the annual reports of those countries' government and finding their deficiencies and seeing where their philanthropy could step in to help subsidize and offset so that those countries can become stable. So with that lesson, and because I don't got Bill Gates money, I was just looking at some organizations around Milwaukee, trying to figure out where are the deficiencies, do I see some commonalities, are there trends, and is there something that can be done where a rising tide can lift all boats? So I looked at these organizations' reports, and I found that this was common across the board. In fact, the best example I found was a sustainability probability of just 4%. And that was also a very well-known organization. Now, I'm sure there's a smaller organization with better odds of sustainability. However, they don't always show posted reports with detailed financials, so I wasn't able to properly gauge them. The problem here can be identified as the inability to produce while simultaneously addressing poverty. We address poverty, but just not in a way that produces, which means we have to, it's like I always say, it's like a boat, right? You ride it twice a year. Every time you take it out, it costs more money. Is it even really worth it? I rather, I have the boat and I call them up and say, can I use the boat? Right? I don't want to be the guy with the boat. So to support these communities, we would need to structure a Fibonacci-like equation around addressing poverty. It would have to consume the past with the current state to produce the future state of the equation. And with all that said, the question must be asked, what does this Fibonacci model look like? Well, allow me to show you. The first one will be representative of a person in need, and the second one would be an initial investment into their escape velocity. This will result in two, or industry-specific education and training that also produces what I call a barriers addressing time period. This time period allows us to take this person while they're in training, take a detailed look at the barriers that are stopping them from really getting out of poverty, and see if we can wrap those supports around them. Those barriers, those barriers can be childcare, housing, transportation, health. Like I said, all the reasons that I started the Mindful Group are all the barriers that were actually stopping people from getting out of poverty, even though I was providing them with free education, training, and a job. These other things were still in the way. The remaining portion of escape velocity investment into those barriers can be considered three, and when added to two, training and education, result in five, entry level or gainful employment. Five, entry-level employment, when combined with the reduction of barriers, results in eight, sustainable employment. This is the event horizon. Escape velocity has been reached. Now, this is a mathematical fact. This is not me speculating. This is not, I've run this thing 1,000 times to see, I gotta be wrong, this can't be true. It cannot be this simple. And we are just looking over it, right? What are the odds that I discover it? I have a hard time dealing with that, so always double check. But this is the event horizon, point of no return, escape velocity is reached, and moving forward, every point in the equation can be seen as a personal economic progress with the variable representing something unique to the individual. The order of operation is no longer important. The same way once a spacecraft exits Earth's gravitational hold, it no longer needs the equations needed to reach there. It can now focus on individualized targets and come up with its own missions. We in space now, we escape Earth, do we want to go to the moon, Mars, whatever we see fit for our life. For these people, that point means deciding if they want to go into entrepreneurship, further their education, become a homeowner. There are all these different ways that they can go now that they have broken the escape velocity of the social economic structure that has been built around them. This is also where the equation becomes perpetual. You see, in this model, perpetual motion, it's my favorite equation, by the way. In this model, the training organization and the gainful employment organization are the same organization. This means that profits made for staffing newly trained individual goes back into the fuel tank, reducing the amount of outside escape velocity investment needed to support the entire structure. No grants, no none of that. I chose a staffing agency for this equation because it's required. It's the only type of company that can put people into any industry while letting them achieve their educational goals. It's the only type of company that can put people into industry and produce enough money to offset the cost of education itself. So a staffing agency was 100% needed for this equation, and it is literally perpetual motion itself. Once I realized this, I started to look at other unique ways that this could address other problems. And that's when I realized that the staffing agency could use the equation not only to invest into further education, but also to invest in the economical enhancement of the people who are actually going through the program. So even beyond just reducing barriers, this equation allows an organization to become a financier to an employee based on their ability to succeed. But we have a credit score system and we have a banking system that works against that. And I know that in the community, well, everybody kind of behind the eight ball as it relates to that. And this is when I understood that the way I track data and the algorithms created at Mindful Measures around predictive behavior and work ethic could be used as a credit score system, where the predictability of future work would allow employee data to qualify them for financial services ranging from vehicle purchases and repairs to home ownership. Let's take a look at that. So at Mindful Measures, we're creating a job-specific time and attendance platform that allows users to clock in from their mobile devices. Great. We've all seen this before. in different variations. It's nothing special. But what is unique is what we do with the data. We use this data to create an unbiased, self-motivated, gamifying version of the employee-employer relationship and work environment. We're able to pull key data points such as attendance percentages, average performance ratings, usefulness ratings, and key performance indicator that gives us an employee statistical probability of success based on attendance, performance, and life barriers. I hate when I get off track. I'm sorry, bear with me. It's my first day. Okay, so one aspect of how we use this key performance indicator as a credit score system in creating home ownership is like this. So I skipped some stuff. I'm sorry. That's because, yeah. So I hate reading. I'm sorry. So this is a real-time resume. Additionally, what we can do with our software firm is we can break down the details of a person's work experience and whatever trade they're doing and what level they're progressing in that trade. We can combine that with performance data, and we can use that to predict employee value. Additionally, we can use this information to provide salary suggestions, hiring, firing, promotions. This creates a completely unbiased world of work. In fact, we can determine promotions by comparing employees side by side on a metric-based way. So I always use this example because historically speaking, we always see it. You have a guy, you have a girl. They both work at the same firm. The guy is buddy-buddy with the boss and they go play golf. The girl actually does more work. It's time for a promotion. Who gets the promotion? Well, the guy. Why? Because they worked this out on the golf course already. Well, guess what? Unless that guy is producing better data, he's done. Right? And the boss has to justifiably show why he gave the promotion to someone who adds less value to the company than the person who they were opposing for the promotion. Now, this key performance indicator allows us to gauge the probability assessed down to the very percent. And the way we use that as a credit system is the mindful group, or the 501c3R, will purchase a dilapidated house from the city at a reduced cost. Mindful staffing will use that house and its construction training to rehab that house at a reduced cost. This brings our labor costs on the rehab to zero, taking a $50,000 scope of work to a $20,000 scope of work, which means we can now sell this house to an employee for $30,000, $40,000. They can enter a rent-to-own agreement with the company, and they're looking at payments of $833 a month for 4 years, and they own this house outright with no debt. Now, the $833 a month is $528 or 39% less than the average rent. This is where I struggled with the business journal. And I said, look, the banks trust the landlord to buy an investment property and rent it out to a person in poverty and pay more than the mortgage, but don't trust the person in poverty to just pay the mortgage. It makes zero sense and it's a backwards equation. So what this does is give people the opportunity to go after homeownership at a price that would be reduced even less than what the mortgage would be if they went through the bank, and to own a house outright in a time period shorter than what it would be if they went through the bank. The average rent in Milwaukee is $1,361 for 850 square foot apartment. The killer part about this model being used in this way is that the nonprofit doubles its investment on the low end, while the individual gains the equity of the true value of the house, which in 53206 is roughly $65,000. After 10 years, this house produces another $15,000 in property taxes that the city of Milwaukee can then use to address other issues, right? This is what it means to take sustainable approaches towards addressing poverty and making investments into problem solving that slowly decreases the need for investment itself. We don't need to continue writing grants for problems that continue to exist, regardless of how much money we throw at them. It's pointless. Now, this is just one example of how the model can be used to address housing, but the initial fuel for addressing poverty is training, education, and employment. Let's take a look at how the model reacts in that environment. So, the initial investment for an individual to attend training and education at Mindful Staffing is approximately $5,000. This investment is made by the state of Wisconsin through the Workforce Board and can be found coming through programs such as WIOA, known as the Workforce Innovations Opportunity Act, which is a federal fund provided to every state for vocational training for underserved communities and youth 18 to 24. The other way the state funds this is through the Food Share Employment and Training Program known as FSET, which is available to anyone who receives food share. The mindful group itself will write a scholarship if people don't qualify for traditional funding, if the funds are available. Uh, One problem here is that both of those programs generally require 20 pages of information, multiple visits to sometimes multiple organizations, and disqualifying factors such as over the income eligibility. For a single person, over the income eligibility means $27,334 per year, or $13.11 per hour. If you make $13.12 per hour, the state will not help you with your problems. Now, the interesting thing about that is that this $2,278 per month before taxes, with the average rent would actually consume 59% of that salary every month, and that's the salary before taxes. It's in people's best interest to stay in poverty. I think people should understand that there is this area of safeness, and then this area of greatness, and then this area of the world watching you fail, right? A 1 cent difference from 1311 to 1312 is supposed to make up the difference of this person supposed to be able to subsidize every government program that was able to help them even survive because they made 1 penny more, which is still not even enough to cover 50% of their rent, right? This is counterintuitive, right? And we're actually crazy for looking at this problem the way we do and thinking that we will at some point get an inevitable result of the end of poverty. It's not going to happen. No one's coming to save us. We have to make the changes. And if we don't make the changes, well, then every manufacturer, every food processor, every employer, period, get ready to stop growing because no one else is coming into workforce. It's not in their interest. They fall into the world watch you fail area the second they call themselves trying to do something productive. And I think that's a huge misconception about people in poverty. And this is the argument I had with my boss when he said, well, you are where you are because of your work ethic. No, I'm not. I took a risk with a guy I never met to learn something I never knew, right? And with that being said, with us looking at these problems and looking at how we want to solve them and the results we wish to have, in order for us in Milwaukee to get something we have never had, we have to do something we have never done, which means that everything we're doing has to, at the very least, slow down. So, for every individual, wait, yeah. So this model in particular is designed in such a way that the Fibonacci effect can take place on education as well. For every individual who does qualify, complete, and go into employment, mindful staffing produces roughly $360 per month in profit, a small yet significant number. This is because the cost of running an education facility is mostly fixed for me at roughly $300,000 a year, with another $125,000 added for every discipline I decide to add. This means that we currently train in construction and medical at a cost of about $600,000 per year, or $50,000 a month. At a minimum, 138 full-time workers in this model will completely offset the cost of education, making it completely free for anybody who wants to go through it. There is, however, a bigger issue with this model. It's foreign. I've learned in Milwaukee that we have a habit of desiring new and innovative solutions, but a real problem with leaving our comfort zone. This is not how it works. Again, we have to do something we've never done to get something we've never had. The fact that we spend millions of dollars on broken models that we know don't work and haven't worked, while award-winning models goes unsupported at scale, makes me wonder, is Milwaukee broken? When I first started doing this work, a very intelligent woman who works at the city and workforce said to me, Reggie, I need you to understand something. She says, no one is going to help you make this happen. I said, why? If the goal is to end poverty and the model works, why would I not get help? She said, the more your model grows, the more grant dollars shrink. A lot of organizations depend on grant dollars to keep their people employed. And so I would not be surprised if they actually hope for your failure. I was speechless. So this can't be true. But as I look up today and I look at how we spend money at the state, I look at the results of the WEDC Innovation Grant, I look at the awardees, I look at the models, I see no sustainability. I see no guaranteed careers. I see no guaranteed jobs. I see attempts. I see people being paid hundreds of millions of dollars to try, but no one is expected to actually achieve. In fact, if they don't achieve, they get the money again because, again, we didn't fund the problem enough. So with all the experience in this room, ranging from medical to hospitality, education, and finance, right? I always miss slides, right? I have to ask the question to you. Is Milwaukee broken or am I just tripping? Thank you.
Reggie, thanks for a great presentation. I recently met with somebody who was talking about who's a manufacturer, and his employees could only make up to a certain amount of money per hour, after which, as you just said, they would lose all their benefits like child care and other things. I think it was like $12.40 or some number like that. So what's the solution for the whoever is providing these funds that we don't cut them off? How do you address that?
Well, it's a couple different ways. So the first thing we got to understand is that certain jobs with certain pay are made for certain people. So when we go to McDonald's, for lack of better examples, and we see a 35-year-old man complaining about getting 15 bucks an hour, we have to first understand that a job at McDonald's is made for a 15, 16-year-old who is learning responsibility, right? We have to focus on getting these people skilled up enough to actually be worth more money so that they can be in jobs where they don't lose all their benefits and by way have to quit the job in order to sustain themselves. And then that opens up those lower paying jobs to more youth and more people who are learning what it is to be responsible and to have a career. And this is how, as companies, we end up with 30, 40-year tenured employees because we bring them in as youth at lower paying jobs. They learn the systems and they work their way up. While the older individuals, we need to focus on getting them the skills and education needed to come into these jobs at higher levels. So I don't think it's necessarily on the employer to figure that out entirely. The employer can help. However, these individuals have to be motivated to get more training and skill set to add more value.
Reggie, I really liked your presentation, and thank you for speaking to the Invest in Milwaukee committee also. One thing that really made things clear for me when we were at the Invest in Milwaukee committee was when you started talking about an example of a single person who got a job and received help from a blessing box and received the child care help. I wondered if you could maybe go through just one example of a person who joins your program and then attends the classes and then is frustrated but receives the blessing box and needs childcare help and gets the childcare help, and how the different pieces fit together.
Absolutely. So there's this one individual who just completely blew me away because when he came in, he was struggling with housing and his girlfriend was pregnant. And so he was like under the gun. And so he went through the training. We helped him with some micro loans and whatnot along the way because he really was struggling. And it's unpaid training because I need to know you're dedicated, right? And so when he graduated the training, he started working in the HVAC industry, right? I put him with an organization called Dave Jones out in Madison. He started working in the HVAC industry. We started collecting data on his work ethic, right? He was a rock star, right? Dave Jones didn't want to lose him. But what ended up happening was he saved up enough money to actually leave Wisconsin. So his girlfriend had the baby. They saved up their money. They left Wisconsin. They went to Arizona. I took his data set, sent it to a company in Arizona where he was applying. They hired him at a higher rate, a higher wage, right? And so about a year and a half ago, he actually inboxed me on Facebook. And he said, I just want to reach out to you, man, and say thank you. When I first met you, I had nothing. I had a kid on the way for the first time and didn't know what to do. Now I'm in Arizona. I got a brand new car. Me and my girlfriend got married. We live in a gated community, and I'm an apprentice in HVAC. And I just wanted to say, man, thank you. Keep doing what you're doing, bro. And I was just like, oh, wow, this actually works, I guess. So that's one example of a person coming in and using the different pieces. Now, the blessing boxes themselves is kind of a different piece. That's something that we use training labor to practice training. And we build these kind of like the little libraries, but they are for non-perishable goods. And we partner with the Milwaukee Rescue Mission to make sure that they stay full. And then we put them every half mile away from each other throughout Milwaukee. And the goal is 147 boxes that will cover all of Milwaukee. And then no family in Milwaukee will ever be more than a half mile away from some type of resource. Thank you guys for having me.